So I hope that now everything will be OK. So welcome, everyone. My name is Wojciech Galanciak, and I would like to talk with you about adding Angular 2 to your Java Enterprise stack. Firstly, let me introduce myself. I work for Genuine Tech, where we do build a lot of tools related or based on Eclipse. For example, my Eclipse, which is dedicated for Java Enterprise developers, and some recent tools like WebKlipse or Angular ID, which are more focused on modern web technologies. My previous experience, all professional experience, is related to Eclipse, but actually this is my first EclipseCon. But unfortunately, I lost my sticker. Today we are going through some introduction about the general concept. Then we are diving into details of Angular 2 as well as TypeScript language. And after that introduction, we'll see some live demo and coding in action. And then we are switch back to the presentation and again talk a little bit more about modern web technologies and tooling in the Eclipse world. OK, so why we are here? The reason is that we would like to show you that it's possible to add Angular 2 to your full stack of application. This diagram shows how it looks right now. We have basically two main layers, server-side and the browser. In the middle of it, we have frameworks like Spring or Struts. But the problem is that the browser layer is very thin. So most of technologies related to front-end are just rendered by backend. So they are tightly coupled to the backend. Backend basically decides how to create and generate the content provided to the user. And technologies like JSP or Velocity just renders them using templates. This approach, of course, is good, but it has disadvantages. The main one is that we have, as I said, they are tightly coupled. So we need to develop those parts at the same time. And it raises the complexity as well as the development lifecycle. So what we can do, we can change it a little bit, but making the browser layer thicker and replace front-end technologies for Java Enterprise with Angular. And in this case, we put fully functional standalone application in the browser, which use browser as a runtime, and we can communicate with our server side. It stays almost the same, untouched, except the one thing, the communication layer, because in this case, we need to somehow expose our content from the server, as well as allow to communicate from browser to the server. And we can do that through web services. In this case, as example, is a JSON protocol. What we can get from that? The main thing is that we have fully decoupled two applications, server-side and client-side. So we can develop them simultaneously or independently, or even if we need some prototyping or client wants to see something, we can create the browser side first without even touching anything on the server side. The only thing which we need is well-defined API. OK, but it's not, Angular is not the only technology on the market which we can put there. But why we choose Angular in this case? The first thing is that it's basically amazing. The simplicity of creating rich, modern applications is great. If you compare it to the application built using Ajax, JavaScript, plus some templates from JSP, it's complicated. It's not easy to get very nice and good user experience. For example, if Angular brings us by default, you can easily add asynchronous call. So basically, you can load the application and then wait for responses from the server without and apply changes and without refreshing. Also, the other thing is that you can basically communicate between parts of the application because Angular is component-based. So we have a lot of components. We communicate with each other. Each of them has state, and based on that, we can change the look and feel or state of one based on the change from another one. But we are going to some details of that later on. Also, we'll see that in action. This is quite new technology. It was released officially this year, Angular 2. But it was announced 2 years ago. So we already can find some interesting examples of Angular applications in the internet. So they are from the basic websites to more advanced to really standalone web-based applications. And one thing worth to mention here is that we are talking about Angular 2, which is a successor of Angular 1. But Angular 1, called AngularJS, is not related. So they rewritten the whole framework. There are completely two separate frameworks. So you need to be careful if you look for some interesting content on blog posts, tutorials, and so on. If it's related to AngularJS, it's not the thing which you want to find. Because right now, we call it just Angular or Angular 2. When I start to work with a new technology, and I'm a Java developer, so for me, web technologies, this is not the thing which I do every day. I always start with understanding the architecture of the framework, because it's then easier for me when I learn to understand what I'm actually doing. I go through the tutorial. At the end, I know why I have such result instead of getting just the result. So let's go through the basic concepts of Angular architecture first. Angular is a modular application, so it means that we build it using modules. We create our own modules or use third-party modules. For example, if you want to use HTTP to call web services, you need to add HTTP module to your application. If you want to create forms, you need to add forms module. So basically, you can exactly define what you want to use in your application, and you do that by adding external modules to it. Also, the application itself is a module. At least one, the default main module. Of course, one application can contain a lot of modules. And the key part and the central part of the application, because it's component-based, it's quite obvious that component is a main part. And component is just a plain class with additional decoration. We'll see how it looks during the demo with metadata. And this metadata basically tells to Angular where is the template, where are styles files, and so on. So based on this metadata, Angular knows that this particular class is a component. Component should be isolated, should have its purpose. We should create a lot of components and basically communicate with each other. Component has its state, so we have properties like in regular class, and the whole state can be reflected in the template. Template is just kind of HTML. Basically, it's an HTML, but it can, except the regular HTML tags, it can contain two more things. First is a template, some elements created using template syntax. It's mainly related to data binding. So we can basically reflect the state using the particular property and show the value of this property in the user interface using template syntax. We'll see it also during the demo. And the last part in the component in the template which can be used are other components. So because we can reuse components inside the template, and we can build our component using different small components. We will see it also during the demo. The last important thing right now for us is how to actually get data from the server or external services, or do something specific not related to to the state of the application and to generation of the view of the application. So we have services, but Angular doesn't define any interface nor class which describes the service. Service is just a class with well-defined purpose. That's all what you need to, what we know. And the only thing related, strictly related to services is that Angular uses dependency injection to inject the service everywhere we want. So the management, the services management is simplified thanks to that. Okay, we know architecture, we know the general concept, but there is one more thing, and for me, one of the main reasons why I love Angular, the TypeScript. TypeScript is the main language for the Angular 2, and the definition is that it's a typed superset of JavaScript. It means that it adds optional typing, static typing to Angular, to JavaScript. The great thing about that is that you can use types, but at the same time, you are fully compatible with JavaScript, because TypeScript transpiles, which means it's this source-to-source compilation from TypeScript to JavaScript. So you can run your application in the browser. You can use external libraries written in JavaScript. So you have already ready-to-go environment, mature environment to build very advanced enterprise applications. I will not go into these details of the language because there's too much to talk about that, but I will show two examples. The first one is just a simple explicit implementation of the interface. As you can see, the code it looks very similar to any object-oriented language. The difference, there are several differences. The main one right now, which I would like to mention, is that the way in which we pass arguments to the constructor, because at the same time there are fields of the class. So we don't need to repeat the declaration of the field in the class. We don't need to assign it to this field in the constructor. Everything what we want is just to pass them to the constructor. So it just simplifies and reduces the code. The second example shows, for me, one of the most important differences, especially if you compare it to Java or C#, is that there is a structural subtyping. It means that we don't need to explicitly implement an interface to be able to, for example, pass our object to the print label method. The thing is that the type is checked based on the shape of the object. So interface defines label field. So any object which has label field can be passed to this function. So this is a quite big difference, but you are able to do not use this syntax and just write whole code almost the same as in Java. Of course, great architecture, simple architecture plus very nice language under is not enough. You need some tooling, and Angular development is command line centric. So anything you do from the command line. From dependency management, we use the npm from Node.js, but also there's a dedicated tool called plethora CLI. It simplifies the way in which you work with Angular application from day to day. It's quite small. It just have a very limited number of commands, but it simplifies, and you see it in action that it's actually great to use it. Okay, so let's do some magic. We are going to use, I wanted to show very simple to-do application, but then I realized that maybe we can do something more interesting. So I reduced backend. It's just Jersey-based application. It exposes one web service to get data, to get one integer every time when we call, but it's random integer. On the front end, we are going to have an application which is an example dashboard application, and we are going to add some chart, dynamic chart, updated based on the data from the server. And let me. First, I will show the server-side application. It's, as I said, it's very simple. It just exposes one web service, so nothing special here. I already started it on Tomcat server, so we can check that it works, and we have random numbers there. More interesting for us in this case is the front-end application, which is based on, it's generated using Angular CLI. So, but it follows the guideline for the structure of Angular application. So most of the, we will not go through all configuration files and so on. We are going to focus only on the code. And the code is gathered in the one place, in the source folder. And we are going to operate only on app folder where our components are stored. As I mentioned, each application is a module, so you need to have at least one default module. The same as in this case, we have the same situation. So we have our default module, which is unfortunately the resolution is quite low for this example, but you can see the same pattern everywhere in Angular. Everything is a class with a decoration. In this case, we have ng module declaration with some metadata passed to it. So based on that, Angular knows what to do with this class. The same is with component. The same is with service. And I will not explain everything here because it's not the part of this presentation. But I will first show you how the application works in action. So this is our default application. So right now we executing ng-serve. Again, this is a command from Angular CLI. So during this process, it's built, then it starts a server, built-in server, and the nice thing is that it also reflects changes automatically. So, okay, so it's very, very small resolution, so I see that there are some layouting issues. Sorry for that, but I cannot change it. So this is our application. It looks nice. It uses Bootstrap to generate most of the UI here, but most of that is just static. So, but we want to add something to it to make it more dynamic. And we are focused on charts page. Right now there are 4 charts. They look nice, but again, they are just presenting a static content. In the code, everything is organized using components. So in this case, we have our dashboard, and dashboard has its components. We have charts. multi-chart component. And again, this is just a class, or maybe it will be easier to show here outline. This is just a class with some fields. Those are properties of the component, with a constructor and one method on init called when component is initialized. And here, as you can see, we have 4 properties. Each of them describes options for a particular chart. And on init method, we just initialize them with some static values. In the UI, so in the template, this part is irrelevant, but here is the most important thing, that we directly use chart component. The chart component is a third-party component which we use. It's a high charts module. So we don't need to write it by ourselves. We can just use it. And here you see an example of template syntax where we bind population options property from the component with options input property from chart component. So we just say, OK, chart, let's set options property for chart component to populations options. Thanks to that, we have different, as you can see, for each chart, we assign different options. In result, we have 4 different charts. So our first step is to create our own chart. So let's add one more row, but let's do it at the beginning to see it. And let's call it dynamic options. OK, we have a new chart. Nothing is displayed right now because the dynamic options is not a property of the component. So let's add it here. And let's assign something to it. And I will use very simple view to do not make any mistakes. So it's like a snippets view, and to also do not switch context between the text editor and Eclipse. OK, so we assigned very simple, just title and one series of data. And voila, it works. We have 5th chart with our static values. And the next step, what we want to do here is to make it a little bit more dynamic. And to do that, we are going to add a service to get the data from the server. So first we need to create a class to represent the data which we get from the server. Again, it's very simple, but I will not write it. Just it has one field called value. It's a number. And next thing, we need to add a data service. Let's call it data service. And again, I will use a small snippet to. It's a little bit more complex than the previous example, but the things worth to mention here is that as I mentioned, again, the same pattern, we need to use decoration to make data service injectable. So thanks to that, we are able to inject it using dependency injection. Then we use HTTP module to call the service, and when we get the service, when you get the service, we map the value to our data model. And one last thing here is that we do not return it directly. As I mentioned, Angular. It's very easy in Angular to do asynchronous call. In this case, we use observable, which allows us to do that. So we have data service. The last thing to do is to add the data service to our module. So our module knows that we want and we can expose this data service and inject it to any component in the module. And we do that by adding it to providers array in metadata for the module. And right now we are ready to inject it to to our component. We do that just by adding it here. As of course, we need to also import it. OK, we are almost there. The last thing is we need to connect somehow the UI with the. We need to get the chart to be able to update and add new values to it. And it's a little bit different way because we cannot this module, this charts module, do not allow for full data binding. So we need to get the chart from the page and then modify its content. So we are going to modify this entry. By adding handler for load event. So when a component is loaded, we call chart, and we pass event context, where the context is this component, the chart instance. And thanks to that, we have an access to it. Of course, we need to declare it. We have a direct access to the object in this case. And after we get the instance, we set interval. So every 1 second, we use our data service to get data, and we subscribe to the results. So we just add a handler, which is called when the data is ready. And when it's ready, we just add it to our chart. And as you can see, it works. With every 1 second, we have updated data. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to show the way in which we can add our own component. So that's all for the demo. So let's back to the site. OK, so you see that it's great. Easily can extend the existing application, add some nice looking responsive elements. You can asynchronous call to the server. So you can easily actually connect with the server application. But what we can do from that in Eclipse? This is the, I think, right question on this conference. So Eclipse Neon made a huge step. And the first step to modern web development. We have support for those technologies, but unfortunately, in the case of Angular, we need a little bit more because there is no built-in TypeScript support. But on the market, there are several technologies available already, open source plugins, plus some paid solutions like our own WebKips. The same with Angular. It's a little bit more limited because there is only one solution available right now. It's Angular 2 Eclipse. And our own solution, which will be available in WebKips and Angular IDE. What you can do next after this talk. So firstly, grab Eclipse, install those plugins. You can start with free. You can start with our solution, which is freemium. You can play with it, learn a little bit of it. Then next week, we are going to release the official release of Angular IDE. The IDE is suited for the Angular development. And again, it will be available for free usage. And if you have any questions, if you would like to chat about Angular 2 or TypeScript or about anything, you can find me. We have booth right there in the hall. Somewhere there, because there is this but you can find us there or anywhere on the conference. OK, I think we are almost exactly on time. So thank you very much for your attention. This is a time for questions. So if you have any questions, you can ask right now, or we can chat just after or later during the conference. OK, so no questions here. So thank you very much again, and see you later during the event.